Hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we are back at it. Rod, where are you at? I'm here in Rhode Island. Where are you at these days?
I'm sorry. Do I know you? It seems like it's been forever.
Yeah, I know. I feel like you've ghosted, or I've ghosted you. I'm not sure what, but it's been a while since our last show. So
I'm in Vienna right now, and it's been a tumultuous summer for me. I don't know when our last show was, but I got deported from Vienna because my visa was screwed up, and I ended up having to spend 5 weeks outside of the country getting all that sorted. But I'm back.
But you've been working. I know you've been traveling, doing some research for your new project, and I guess just in general, kind of having your ear to the ground there in Europe. What are you hearing? I know there's still a war going on in Ukraine with the Russians. I think as per this recording, I believe there's an assassination attempt made on Dugin, but they killed his daughter instead of Dugan or something like that. Anyway, the war rages. What are you sensing and hearing in your travels in Europe these days?
Well, everywhere I go, and I've been traveling a lot this summer doing research, everybody is terrified of the coming winter because there's not going to be enough gas. The Russians have either shut off completely or greatly restricted the flow of natural gas to the continent. And they're doing this because the West has sanctioned the hell out of them, and they're like, two can play at that game. So they've cut off the flow of gas. And now we are looking all over Europe at the possibility that people are going to freeze in the dark in their homes.
Well, Rod, surely there's a plan B in place for the smart people who run the Europe. The European Union, right? I mean, what are the smart people? What plan B do the smart people have?
They have none. That's the thing. Early in this war, Viktor Orban, the prime minister of Hungary, warned that this was going to be a problem. Whether you like it or not, much of Europe, especially Germany, which is the economic engine of the European Union, is heavily dependent on Russian gas. And now that it's gone, all those renewables that the Germans wanted to kick in, they ain't doing nothing. And so people are starting to panic already in England, for example. I was at a wedding in France this past weekend. An old friend got married. And I talked to a woman from England who said, back in the UK, families are starting to move in with each other because nobody can afford their electricity bills right now, and it's summer, right? Winter's coming, and Viktor Orban gave this speech that our listeners will have heard about in Transylvania earlier this summer, in which the thing that was quoted in the West was a really ill-advised comment he made about Europe doesn't need to become mixed race. Mm-hmm. Now, I think he meant something much less offensive than people took it, but nevertheless, it was a stupid comment.
Well, especially to American ears, like we hear race and we think something very specific, but if you look at the way that the people use race in around the world, it's really is a kind of a different thing, but whatever.
Yeah, he's using he meant it as culture, and he's really talking about the mass migration of Muslims. But in any case, what I think was a far more important things that Orban said was warning in that same speech that governments are going to fall in Europe because of the economic catastrophe from the cutoff of natural gas. This is something the European Union did all to itself.
Fall? I mean, how do you hear him? How do you hear those words, Rod? I mean, fall?
Yeah. Well, he said that, and he's perfectly right. He said that history shows us this. When people are hungry, when people are cold, they take to the streets. And when people realize that their leaders did this to them, because they wanted to show Russia who was boss, they're going to turn on those leaders. And it doesn't, this is the thing that drives me nuts about the impossibility of any kind of reasonable discourse about, in terms of foreign policy realism about Russia and Ukraine, is that when Orban first started saying that sort of thing, the usual suspects in the media and in the European Union just started saying, oh, he's Putin's lapdog. Well, guess what? Here we are nearing the end of August. Winter is barreling down on Europe like a freight train, and people are scared. My friends in Hungary say that people who have wood-burning stoves are stockpiling firewood.
Wow.
I mean, this is a
That's
21st
tremendous.
century.
That's tremendous. I mean, that really is quite something. Yeah. So I have a question about that. I mean, there certainly are smart people who made this prediction, right? Not just Orban, but other people can sort of why have the people in charge not listened? Like, what is that about? Do you think that they've just are they just sort of in this sort of strange world of pretend, or what's your sense of that?
I think part of it is the United States was pushing them to take a hard line against Russia. But I think it's also the case that they believe that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a total affront to liberal democracy, and they're right about that. But they thought that it was Europe's business to stand with Ukraine. Now, the thing is, as I've said over and over here, I think Russia had no business invading Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is, here in the real world, this is a continent, Europe, that has made itself heavily dependent on Russian natural gas, especially Germany.
Why though? Just for our audience, because again, you and I have sort of talked a little bit offline, but like, why did they make this seemingly fatal choice, or potentially fatal choice, to become so dependent, to outsource that to a state like Russia?
Well, I suppose that they figured that because the Cold War is over now, Russia was going to be a normal country. It could be depended upon to provide cheap natural gas to fuel the European economy, the factories of Germany, and they trusted it. And we saw Angela Merkel. She was the biggest one in Germany pushing the Nordstrom Pipeline to make Germany more dependent. After the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami in Japan, the anti-nuclear movement in Germany, anti-nuclear power movement, which has always been strong, it prevailed upon the German government to cancel all the nuke plants in the country and commit to renewables. Well, guess what? They put themselves completely at the mercy of Putin, and now he is doing the reasonable thing and exercising that power. I hate it, but look, I'm planning to be here, Kale, this winter. I'm moving to Budapest at the end of September, and I feel like I'm going to be here to see real history, history.
I mean, it's really kind of striking, honestly. It's so if I can understand, if you can help us understand this Nordstrom pipeline, like, is that literally like what it sounds like? It's one big pipeline that pumps what is it, oil or gas?
Natural gas into Europe
from Russia to Germany. So there's literally like this big, like, physical pipe. Like, that's what we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, and the Russians have shut it off or cut the flow down to almost nothing because they can.
I mean, that's a remarkable gamble. I'm just thinking about the image of this thing, like all of this stuff, like going down into one pipeline that goes in. Like, all you have to do is like shut it off. I mean, like, there's no redundancies built into the system. I mean, talk about a hyper fragile system.
And a friend of mine who's involved in the national security field back in the United States said that there's going to be a lot of liquid natural gas shipped across the ocean to Europe this winter to try to fill the gap. And what's going to happen if one of those LNG barges explodes at a European terminal? That's the sort of thing that could take out an entire city. I mean, and
not just take out a city, but precipitate a chain reaction of events that I guess that's why I'm hearing you say that revolutions, bad things happen when the basics aren't taken care of, right? And I think that we in the West, both in the European West and certainly in the North American West, we sort of have this delusion. It's almost like, it reminds me of the kind of end of history delusion, that everything is just going to sort of just keep going and everything is just going to be fine. And I'll always have cold and hot water. I'll always have my electricity. I'll always have all this stuff. And it's like, well, actually, the entirety of our world rests upon something that's actually pretty fragile.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And do you remember back in, gosh, I think it was 2004, someone in the Bush White House, it was said to be Karl Rove, but they were quoted on background, not with no attribution,
Oh, okay.
told the Times reporter that we Americans create our own reality in Iraq.
Yeah. Yeah,
There
I
is
do. I
hubris.
very much remember that. And I remember, being like, well, that's quite that's quite something to say out loud. But it's interesting you're sort of using that as a kind of almost a modality or framework with
Sure.
which
Yeah.
elites see the world.
Yeah, and I think these European elites, they saw the Russia-Ukraine fight as a clear case of good versus evil. Interestingly, something that you didn't see a lot in the nations bordering Ukraine. When I was and people know about Hungary, the Hungarians are famously conflicted about this. They're mostly very much against Russia's invasion, but they don't see Ukraine as plucky little Ukraine because they had their own problems with the Ukrainian government, government in Kiev, which was oppressing the Hungarian minority in the far west of the country. Same with the Romanians. So, there's a lot more, it's a lot murkier from that part of the world. Nevertheless, um, all of Europe is going to face a hell of a challenge. And you have countries like Spain, which has actually done pretty good and doesn't depend
Mm.
on Russian natural gas. The rest of the European Union that does is going to say, well, why don't you send us some of your natural gas? Same with Hungary. Hungary is dependent on Russian natural gas, but it managed to fill its storage capacity. So it's going to be
Right.
better off. What happens when the Germans say, you got to send us some of that? This could mean the breakup of the European Union. And it's not just this crazy alarmist scenario. It could really happen in real time. We don't look, people have been through COVID here in Europe and, of course, back home,
Yeah.
and they've been traumatized. They're angry. And now they're facing their skyrocketing energy bills. And the idea that they could be sitting in their houses in the dark, cold, this winter. People are already talking about over here. I'm seeing on European Twitter, they're saying my grandmother is on a pension. Her energy bill has already doubled, and it's not even winter. I mean, something's got to give.
Well, and you bring up COVID, you bring up all the various traumas, that we've lived through in the past several years here. And the lies that the ruling class have engaged in are really going to kind of catch up in a big way. And I wonder if people are tuned into that frequency. We've talked about this before, many months ago, I suppose. But I mean, who can you actually trust to tell you the truth these days?
Don't trust anybody.
What institution, what public facing institution can you trust? I can't really name one.
No, me
You
neither.
know,
I can't either. Ross Douthat had a good column recently in the New York Times talking
oh, good.
about
Yeah,
how
I'm glad I remember. Bring that up. Good. Yeah,
yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead. Sorry.
yeah. He talked about how, given the way the public health bureaucracy in the U.S. has handled COVID and now handling monkeypox, he said, "I can't believe a thing these people say." And he's writing this not just as a pundit, but as someone who has dealt personally with a devastating chronic illness.
Right.
So, they've done this to themselves, the public health bureaucracy. We can't right now. I don't know if you saw this the other day. It was reported in the Military Times that the Navy is offering $115,000 to people to get them to come join the Navy. $115,000. That's how serious the recruiting crisis is. Who wants to join when you're going to join up with this woke outfit that is going to end up sending our men and women could send them into combat to what, queer the Donbass? I mean, who do you trust? And now we have here, I'm starting to sound like the old barstool guy, but Kale, we've just seen the FBI raid Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago. I don't put anything past Donald Trump. But who can trust the FBI after Russiagate?
Yeah, I find that stuff, to be kind of wild, honestly. That the politicization of all of these institutions, again, independent of whatever it is, you think of Trump, it does seem to me pretty clear that the actions of these government agencies exceeds whatever sin is being committed. I don't know. It's a wild thing. I mean, it's just wild to see it in real time.
And did you see that tweet that General Michael Hayden, the former director of national security, head of the CIA, head of the NSA, he put out about Mar-a-Lago? Some journalist, I think it was, tweeted out there, I've covered lots of bad guys around the world, and nothing is more evil and cynical than the Republican Party today. Michael Hayden retweeted that and said, I agree. And I was the CIA director. Now think about that. This guy, Michael Hayden, approved drone attacks on ISIS. He fought ISIS, he fought Al-Qaeda, he fought some of the worst people in the world. And here he is saying that the political party that represents more or less half of all of his fellow Americans is more evil than Al-Qaeda.
I don't even know where to begin with that.
Yeah, well, it tells you something about the way the ruling class sees half the country. And when I saw that, it just made me think that, I do not like Donald Trump, but I'll vote for whoever's against those people, the people like Michael Hayden.
Well, right. I mean, that is a pretty shocking statement to make. He's a former director of the CIA.
Yeah, and of the national security. Remember the director of national intelligence, I think it was called.
Okay.
Bush created this. Head of the NSA. This is a man who was in terms of controlling information, the most powerful man in America. And here he is saying that Republicans are more evil than Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
So it wasn't even just sort of, not that it would have been necessarily acceptable to say it just specifically about Trump, but he said Republicans.
Republican Party, yeah.
46% of the electorate.
Yep, and talking about
evil.
Wow. Evil. Yeah. And talking about for our grand tour of corrupt institutions, since you and I talked last, Matt Walsh, Libs of TikTok, and others, Billboard Chris, have brought up how it started to expose how so many of these children's hospitals are experimenting on kids with cross-sex hormones and things like that, and lying about it, flat out lying about it.
And surgeries, right?
And surgeries.
And surgeries. Surgeries between the ages of 12 and 18.
Saying we don't do any such thing, yet they did. They were caught red-handed.
Right.
But the media naturally are running interference for them. So you can't trust the media. Just the other day, I saw that a federal judge in Maryland has ruled that a local school board has the right to hide from parents if their children are presenting as transgender at school. Now, this ought to set off alarm bells everywhere because, Kale, the thing I've been hollering about for a long time, that what we're moving into now in America is a kind of soft totalitarianism that is reminiscent of what existed under the days of communism. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? This is what the communist states did everywhere. They had an ideological principle that the state was prior to the family, and the state had a responsibility to protect children from their backwards families. Now it's happened here in America. You have an Obama-appointed federal judge in Maryland, Paul Grimm, saying, yes, that's true. What is it going to take to wake people up? I honestly don't know at this point.
Well, that's a pretty fundamental divide, right? That if you have a critical mass of judges and agency directors and whatever people who man and populate the governmental structures, if they believe that the family does not precede the polis or precede the government. Let's just be a little more clear here. Mm-hmm. Like that's the implications of that are pretty massive.
Massive.
And I would argue that they violate the sort of the founding principles of our country.
Yeah, you come after kids, it's all over. There is no constitutional democracy more important than what comes between a father and a mother and their child. Forget it. What these people are doing, They are hollowing out democracy. At the same time, they scream at the Trump supporters and say, you're the ones hollowing out democracy. But look what they're doing.
Well, what do they mean? What do you hear them to mean when they say things like, this phrase that you hear it a lot, right? Our democracy. What do they mean by our democracy? Because, like, I believe that, I'm a husband and a father, and I take those roles very seriously. You do too. It's like kids, like,
now, a father. I'm not a
well, I
husband for
know.
much.
Fair enough. All right, but you don't need to do that right now. No,
Yeah.
but the idea that somehow I have to subordinate my role as father to the state because the state knows best. I mean, is that the new sitcom that's coming out instead of Father Knows Best? Is it the state knows best? I mean, do people hear how creepy that is?
Yeah, well, I put on my blog the other day something from an essay by Alexandra Kollontai, who is one of the top Bolsheviks, one of the few female top Bolsheviks,
Oh.
and a total social revolutionary. And she wrote in 1920, after the Bolshevik Revolution, she wrote about how under the new order, the parents are freed from having to be parents. It will be the state's job to educate and form children to be good communists. And parents are free to do what they want to do. They don't have to worry about their kids. Well, guess what? If you watch libs of TikTok, which you really should. I mean, a lot of people call it like nut picking, but over and over.
Okay.
No, it's not.
But yeah, you mentioned that on your blog the other day. This canard, this nut picking canard. Explain the smear and explain why you think that it's bullcrap.
Well, it's a play off of the phrase nitpicking, like picking little tiny things to making a mountain out of a molehill, to use another cliche.
Mm-hmm.
But nut picking means picking out a few crazies and deceptively saying that they represent the whole.
Right.
The problem is that the libs of TikTok is picking up these things that teachers are putting out on to TikTok, talking about how they are radicalizing their students for LGBT and gender ideology in particular. It happens over and over and over again. And then when you see that, and then you see school system after school system putting in policies in place that are intended to deceive parents, to protect the trans child from their parents, you realize this is not some minor thing. Wesley Yang, who's got a great Substack called Year Zero, I hope people will subscribe to. He talks about in his Substack how he's talked to a lot of people in school systems all around the country, and this is thoroughly mainstream. Just today, before you and I came on to record, I saw Libs of TikTok sent out something from Richardson School District in suburban Dallas, Texas, putting out a questionnaire to students designed to help enlist the school system on the side of the student if they want to deceive their parents. This is not happening only in blue state Massachusetts or California. It's happening there in Texas.
So I have sensed for a while that conservatives have contented themselves with the idea that, well, I live in, Alabama, or I live in Texas. Clearly, the evidence, these school districts are not in alignment with, the sort of the surrounding philosophies and worldviews of the people. I mean, so these school systems, look, that's suburban Dallas, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is hardly, as you say, this is not Berkeley. This is suburban Dallas. I mean, I don't understand why more people don't make hay out of that. Like, how do they not understand that?
Look,
the implications of that, I should say. Sorry.
Yeah, I used to live in Dallas, as you'll remember, and I had a friend down there who was telling me a few years back the Fort Worth Independent School District had a woke superintendent who tried to push this sort of thing through. And there were a few parents who raised hell about it, and they finally got it stopped. But my friend who was involved in this movement said that it was murder to try to get parents engaged. A lot of parents didn't agree with the policy, but everybody is either too distracted or too afraid to do it.
Right.
to raise their voice. But
But I think maybe there's even something more going on here. And this is something we alluded to many months ago. But people are probably familiar if you listen to our show or watch our show. This idea of the long march through the institutions, right?
yeah,
And what is interesting to me when I think of school districts like the Dallas Unified School District or the Fort Worth School District or whatever their versions throughout the
right,
country, you can only put on the table the fish that you can get out of the pond. And sorry to use the analogy, but the idea here is that you know the teachers that you get to staff the schools come from carefully curated ponds or schools, right?
hmm
Minting institutions. When you have all of those minting institutions, that says that you are a bona fide, certified school teacher, when you can capture those institutions that confer those certifications, then you will eventually run out of teachers to hire that are not infected
yeah,
by this particular mind virus. And I think people really kid themselves in not having clued into that early. And so if there's going to be a course correction on this sort of thing, and look, I believe in the work that Chris Rufo and all these other activists are doing to raise the alarm bells. But what I don't think people like me and you have fully come to terms with, and I'm not necessarily saying me and you, but people like us, is
yeah,
that where are they going to get teachers that are not woke?
yeah.
There is
But
nowhere to get them, Rob.
yeah, and similarly in the world I understand journalism, the journalism schools are madrasas to produce woke propagandists. They weren't always that way, but
But
they
they
have.
have been for a really long time,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
way
yeah.
longer than I think you and I have appreciated,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, yeah, and plus, it's also the case that if you're a young conservative now and you look at journalism, chances are you don't want to have anything to do with it because it would be impossible for you to have a career in mainstream news without violating your conscience. The other day, Quillette ran an excellent essay by this guy William Deresiewicz. I hope I said his name right. He talked about why he left academia. This is a guy who was almost 10 years at Yale because
Right.
he loved literature. And he's a really good writer. He's written several popular books. But he said he loves literature. One of the books he wrote was about how Jane Austen taught him how to live.
Right.
But he couldn't get a job. He applied to like 50 universities of all kinds, even like suburban community colleges, no jobs. And he talks about about the corruption of academia and how teaching literature, it hasn't been about teaching literature for a long time. It's all about theory and playing the
Well,
game.
Rod, look, I mean, this is right in my wheelhouse. I mean, I was in graduate school at LSU I was there from 95, 96, 96 to 97. And I had an opportunity to go on and not just take a terminal MA, but, I was invited to continue on with the PhD program. And I made what I thought, you know, I made a shrewd decision back in 97 to take my terminal MA because I witnessed firsthand a job search. And the job search was so incredible that I knew then, even if I didn't really have all the words to articulate it, but I knew then in order for me to continue in my trajectory, my desire to become a university professor, because that's really what I wanted to do, I would have to completely bury what I really thought. Completely, because I love literature, and I did the theory. I know all the theory pretty much backwards and forwards. I feel pretty competent in that zone. But in order for me to get through a hiring committee, there's just no way I was going to be able to do it. Even if I would have parroted the party lines, I would have just no one wants to hire, nobody wants to hire me. I'm to use current terminology, I'm a cis, white, heteronormative, patriarchal, bad guy.
Religious bigot,
Right. It's all those things.
pale
And even,
penis having
right. And
papist.
even if I would have hidden those things that I could have hidden, there's a certain an integrity question, right?
Mhm.
To sort of lie. And so this is like, and this is no exaggeration. This is in 1997, Rod. It's 2022,
Yeah.
and so if it was that bad at a place like LSU back in 97, where you could, if you were tuned in, you could sort of see the writing on the wall. This has been going on for a really, really long time.
Right.
So I'm not surprised to hear Darasevich, sort of say this. I'm not surprised at all.
Right.
There's
Let me
nowhere to go.
Okay, let me put this to you then, since this is your field and this is something you and I are both concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
Philip Reef, the sociologist, said that a civilization begins to die when it is no longer capable of transmitting its core values to the next generation. We now have a scholarly elite in literature and in the humanities, which are not only incapable of doing so, they refuse to do so because they believe that our civilization is corrupt. What do you think that means for the long-term survival of Western civilization? And I think it really is that dire, because it's not important necessarily for the factory worker or the street sweeper to have read Shakespeare. It's nice if he has, but it's not utterly necessary. It is necessary, though, for the kind of intellectual class that would keep the tradition alive, to have abandoned the tradition and to have trained young people who are normally should be there to receive this inheritance and care for the inheritance and pass it on, to train them into refusing the inheritance, which I think is happening all over. Am I too apocalyptic?
Well, in short, no. I think the courage and confidence and ultimately the faith to tell our story, and I think do have to understand it as our story, wherever you find yourself in the sort of the hierarchy and the structures that be, et cetera. When you no longer operate under a shared narrative, there's no us. There's no us there. And so I genuinely believe that you cannot you're on borrowed time, as long as once you can't tell that story and share that story. And it is interesting to me, it's not surprising to me as I think back on it, that the way in which the postmodernists, in conjunction with the Marxists, and post-structuralist feminists, etc., attacked both the story and the language necessary to tell a story, that these are the sort of the twin pinchers that destroy us. And so, so then it's just a matter of sort of playing it out until, don't be the last, if you're the last one, make sure you turn the lights out, that kind of mentality. So no, I don't think it's apocalyptic at all. But I think a larger reason why it's so important, your question about the capturing of these English departments, et cetera, is that in the modern university, the English departments became the sort of de facto theology departments of the modern university, right? So that they were the holder of the sort of cultural inheritance. They saw themselves that way. And so indeed, if you would go to a, mid-century, if you were to go to a modern American university, the English department was where all the action was. It was where all the activity was. It was all the smart kids would go to, who were not into the maths or the sciences. They would gravitate to the English departments, not the philosophy department, not the other departments. But it was the English department because they were the ones who helped make sense out of the whole endeavor. And so, because what is it? I think it's Newman Cardinal Newman talked about theology's role as being the queen of the sciences, and really being the sort of the connective tissue for a modern university. Well, in a modern secular environment, there is not a theology department, not in the way that we would understand a theology department. So the English departments became the de facto holders of that prime position, that position of primacy. So the energies that once theory took over, that it acted as almost the way that modernism works in theology. that it became a kind of solvent, an acid, as you have talked about, liquid modernity, that undermines the very basis of narrative. So instead of Shakespeare being the paragon of some of the best that has been written and thought and performed, he becomes an agent of oppression, right? So and that even the very language that a poet engages in, it's all under the sort of the rubric of the hermeneutics of suspicion, right? And so you always have to be in search of power and power games, and the way that these great cultural icons are actually figures that are upholding hegemonic oppression for minorities, et cetera. And so
I believe it was Ibram. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you can see that with it. So if you can attack the very basis of that, both in terms of the project, the cultural project as a form of colonialism, let's say, but also that language itself is a tool of oppression, then you undercut its reason for being. And so then you not only can you not trust the guts or the content of the story, the thing that we are watching and seeing and being moved by, but the language itself is also a tool that ultimately means nothing. So therefore, it's all about posturing and pointing out power when you see it. And then you see that it's kind of a cheap parlor game. And that is what the universities, the English departments have been selecting for since I was a kid. So there's no us, there's no our, there's no story, there's no narrative. In fact, all grand narratives have to be problematized and forms of systematic oppression.
You're killing me here. You're killing me.
I'm just giving you the party line. I mean,
I know. That's why I went to get a beer while we were. For those who aren't joining us by video, I'm drinking an Austrian beer. I only have 1 week left in Austria, and the beer here is awfully good. So
I bet it is.
But Kale, I think that a lot of Americans, probably ordinary people, probably like I was the first time I went to Oxford. I had the idea and I've never studied at Oxford, just visited Oxford. I had in my head this idea that the Oxford of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and even of Sheldon Van Auken, and I knew times had changed, but surely there is an eternal Oxford. And I get there and I go to the Eagle and Child, which was the Inklings pub.
Yeah.
And I walk in and it's a beautiful pub to look at, but they're playing like some jangly pop music. And it was just horrible. Yeah. And I later found out from friends of mine, Christian friends of mine who taught there at the school or who went to the school, who are affiliated with the university in some way, that that this is a common thing with Americans whose idea of Oxford was shaped by those mid-century great Christian writers and exponents of literature. But the world is gone. Now, you have, since we last talked, you have been to Oxford. Was that your first time?
Yeah, it was. It was a great trip. First time to the UK. I'd been to Italy and France a couple of times, but this was the first time for me going to England. And it was weird, man. I mean, it was great. Oxford is beautiful, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But it was really strange, like being in England. I've never been, but I really kind of felt home in a weird sort of way. I'm not sure how to make sense of it. I mean, I have plenty of English blood in me, so but it almost felt like there were memories. It's hard to explain. It really was, but really a beautiful place. And so I did the full thing, there for, went to Christchurch, went to Magdalen, and went to the Bodleian, and went to the Big Heads, and went to St. Mary's Church, and all the different places. I went punting. I did all a very sort of quintessentially
clotted cream.
Oh, and my goodness, clotted cream. I went to a high tea. And oh my, in fact, I'm gonna go grab some now. Clotted cream was just a revelation. But it just,
you and I didn't have that growing up in Baton Rouge, did we?
No, we did not. No. The culinary world you and I grew up in was either bologna and cheese sandwiches with ketchup, or it was like real Cajun food. The real Cajun food was good, but when you were a kid, you're like, oh, I don't want any of this grandma and grandpa crap. I want McDonald's. But at any rate, Oxford was really a study in contrast, as you point out. You're right. I mean, I think all Americans go to Oxford, or many Americans go to Oxford with this sort of romantic sense of, oh, it's like it's old fashioned and it's lovely and
Brideshead.
right, right, exactly. I mean, I taught Brideshead while I was there, and went to Blenheim Castle, birthplace of Churchill, and it's just so amazing. But really, the guts of the institution are as woke and as progressive as anything you would see on this side of the pond. I mean, it's really a lot of pride flags and the whole bit. Um, and but what struck me, Rod, was not so much that disconnect, but what really struck me was, you're looking around, and we went to Keble College and all the different places, right? And they're all the colleges, right, that then make up the university, right? All the colleges enjoy some level of independence, and all of the colleges, especially the sort of the original colleges, are basically built on, like, physically built on the model of the monastery. So every one of them have the four square enclosure with the churches, with the church attached to the cloister, and the classroom buildings and the residence halls. It's all this big complex. They're all essentially mini Benedictine monasteries. Long, of course, disassociated from that original intent, but these were places of formation in the way that you and I might think of in explicitly religious terms. That the university was the place where, knowledge was gathered, and you would go out for your lectures, for those sorts of things. But in your colleges, these were places where you went to get formed as a person. Your mind is formed, and your soul is formed, and your body is formed, oriented toward this thing. And
by a civilization that was confident in itself, and that it knew what a man was.
Right. And what
a human being was.
What we're for. No, this is exactly right. The confidence is so confident that they would waste, and I'm using that very kind of American word, right, to waste the resources on building a college with a chapel and with an enclosure in such stunningly beautiful, expensive resources. It's hard. You're sitting in one of those chapels, right, and you're kind of looking around, and everything is beautiful. It is in stone, it is in oak. These beautiful windows. Everything is just really amazing, and you're struck. You're like, wow, you're in the presence of somebody years and years and years ago, centuries ago, thought this activity was so important that they would build buildings and articulate space that would last not just their lifetime, not just the life cycle of a generation, but to last 1,000 years. I mean, you're looking at these buildings. You go to like a place like Christ Church, which was, I think, originally Cardinals College or whatever. But it's like this was built to last thousands of years. Can you imagine anybody having that kind of faith right now in 2022 to waste the money to build an institution that is to last for hundreds of years, much less thousands?
You hear you talk about what you saw there, and that revelation to you. I had the same thing happen to me just over the weekend when I finally went to the monastery, the Abbey of Mont Saint Michel in northern France. It was on the cover of the Benedict option, but inspired by the way the filmmaker Terrence Malick used it in his great 2013 film To the Wonder. And there you are. You're holding it up. That's Mont Saint Michel right there. It's built on a granite island just off the coast, maybe a kilometer off the coast of Normandy. And it was started in the year 708 when a nearby bishop had repeated visions of St. Michael the Archangel coming to tell him, build a church on that rock. Over the centuries, it was built up, and now you have what the French call the wonder, la merveille.
Love that.
Because it is a stunning thing. And I was reading just this morning as I was preparing my Substack, Henry James, who wrote a famous short book called Mont Saint Michel and Chartres, said that when you go to Mont Saint Michel, this medieval abbey on the rock, said you have to make yourself like a child in order to enter into the world of the medievals who loved God so much and had such a vision of God that they erected such a glorious building to his worship. And when you go there, Kale, I don't know if you've ever been, but you see
I've not, no.
It's on a small granite island that is cut off from the mainland by a tidal pool. And it has some of the strongest tides in Europe. When the tide is out, it's just wet sand. But when the tide comes rushing in, it is a true island.
Right.
And so these people had to carry, over the centuries of the Middle Ages, had to carry heavy stones across that tidal pool, the squishy sand, and up the granite rock to build that thing, and they did it.
Well, and by hand. I mean, there are no massive engines to make that happen. I mean, I mean, again, we have that expression. Sorry to interrupt here, but we have that expression. It was, quote, a true labor of love. But I mean, do we really know what a labor of love is unless we've carried granite blocks across marshy sand? One block after another over. Like, how long did it take for them to build it, Ron?
Oh, it was a work in progress for, I think, about 1,000 years. But
I mean, can you imagine that? It's crazy.
Yeah, no, the main part of it, the part that we all see, was built in the 1300s, in Gothic style. But in any case, just to see the thing is to be given a glimpse of a higher world, of a higher truth that is still available to us. This is the great message of Malick's movie, To the Wonder, is that, because these people, men whose names we don't even know, this labor of love stretching over centuries, built this thing, this monument to God, that glory, that vision is still available to us in the modern age if we have eyes to see. And having been to Oxford too, and having beheld the same just ravishing beauty that you have, a beauty that is particularly acute for Americans, because we have nowhere like that. Maybe Yale, but
even that, but the sense of time that you get. I mean, like, to think that some of these buildings have been there for 900 years, in continual and perpetual use. It's just a shocking scope of time that we Americans just simply do not have.
Do you know, in the Bayeux Tapestry, which records it's a tapestry, a big carpet that was knitted, the illustrated history of William the Conqueror conquering England. There is a panel that shows Mont Saint Michel.
Oh, that's so cool! I didn't know that. That's so cool. Yeah. That's 1066, right? That's the famous. Yeah, of course.
So I was at this. The reason I'd gone to France was to go to my friend's wedding, and I was just talking to some folks there who had come in from England for the wedding because the groom had gone to school in England. And just talking to me, they said, "Oh, you sound so European. You have such a European point of view." And what they meant by that was strictly that I like to eat and I like old buildings.
Yeah.
That's it. To them, that is European. And you know what? Maybe they're right.
I was going to say, I think there's really something to that. How old?
That's why I feel at home over there in a way I don't feel back in our country. Simply because I absolutely adore old things, old places.
Yeah. So how old were you when you went to Europe the first time?
17.
Yeah, so I went to Europe when I was 19, and I can honestly say, and just knowing you and knowing your story and the things that we've talked about over the years and read from you, I most certainly can date my life, sort of before and after that. That I was made an irrevocably different person after I went to Europe. And like for me it was Italy, right? I went to Rome the first time, and of course Rome is even older than Oxford, is even older than these places. And but I just remember getting there, and we unpacked all of our stuff, and we immediately gathered down at the gathering point at the boarding house, which was run by a convent, and we walked in all these back roads into the arms of Saint Peter. And I just remember being like, I had no idea. I had no idea, time. I had no idea. But then, I was there. I was there for, a 3.5, 4 months. And, just the rhythms of hearing the bells and walking through these old streets and these cobblestones that have been here forever, and walking into these churches and eating that kind of food. And look, I was a college student. I wasn't going to fine dining. I was just eating Roman vernacular, but it's just, there's just something about that it poisoned me, honestly. I say that in a good way, but it changed me. It altered me. It altered my tastes, my expectations. It altered what I wanted and what I see in a way that it's just different.
Yeah, you're telling my story too. I mean, for me, as we famously written about this so many times, Christianity first became real to me seeing Chartres, the Gothic cathedral. And I think for me, what it was the idea that this is what Christianity once was and could be.
Yeah.
There was nothing in my experience in America that opened that up to me. And similarly, in a non-religious sense, just to go to Oxford and see, this is what the education can be.
Right.
This is a place made for serious people to study serious ideas. When I was in Oxford, in Cambridge this summer, I met a young South African graduate student who was really down on a lot of the people, his fellow students at his college in Cambridge.
Sure.
Because he said they have no idea. I mean, this was a guy who was coming from South Africa, and at a time in that country's history in which it's falling apart. I mean, his own grandmother and little brother had been held hostage by a gang and tortured.
Right.
But here he was at Cambridge, in one of the oldest colleges there, and he said, "I'm having to hear my fellow students talk about how it's nothing but a cesspit of oppression and all that. They have no sense of gratitude, no gratitude for what's been given." And that is the thing that one of the most overwhelming things that struck me and always strikes me when I go to places like Oxford, Cambridge, Mont Saint Michel, Rome, wherever I go, it's gratitude. Because these people, even if I have no Italian blood in me, I don't, it's all part. If you were a man or a woman of the West, this is yours, whatever the color of your skin.
Yeah, and I agree. That's the kind of thing that animates me, is that I believe that this is our humanity's patrimony, and we can take it really seriously. And honestly, even though it can get me into a little bit of a dark place sometimes, I can kind of flip that over. And maybe this is where we can sort of finish for the day, though, is that, look, we did it once. Maybe we've done it more than once, but as a collective, we did this thing as a culture. Those buildings teach us this. The cuisine teaches us this. Our literature, our stories, and what they are still there, and they are ready for us to take up and read again. Those still exist, and so we've done it. And so I believe that it can speak to us again, but we've got to get out of this fog of distraction, this
fog of nihilism.
It is. And it is this strange default nihilism that we have found ourselves in, that itself is now going on over a century. This is what Eliot is writing about in The Wasteland, is the nihilism, is the breakup. But I believe that we can recapture it. But and look, this is what I really hope that you can get to in your reenchantment book.
I hope so too.
That it's there, so.
When I was in Normandy, I went up to see Mont Saint Michel in the company of Gavin Ashenden. Gavin is known to a lot of people online. He was a former Anglican priest and bishop. He had been chaplain to the royal household in England, but he left the clergy life behind to become a Catholic convert. And so he invited me. He and his wife have a little stone cottage by a river in rural Normandy, half an hour away from Mont Saint Michel. And I went to visit him, and he accompanied me to the abbey, and we sat around drinking Calvados, 30-year-old apple brandy that had been made by the father of his farmer neighbor.
Wow.
And we talked about the crisis around us and what our calling is as men of the West and as men of the Christian West to do. I'll be writing about that on my Substack soon, what he had to say. But I tell you, man, I went out, it was long after midnight. I went out to, in fact, I looked at the timestamp on my photo. It was 1:30 in the morning. I went to the little tiny stone chapel behind his house out in the dark with only the roar of the river behind me. I lit candles and I prayed. And it was such an incredible moment. It was a moment of such timelessness and such a gift to me. It was just all very simple. This house had been a mill at one point,
Right.
but it was there, and it gave me such a sense of hope. The next morning, I woke up. I slept upstairs at the cottage, listening to the river, and I looked out the window, smelled the fresh country air, and I thought, I'm glad to be alive. Thank you, God, for giving me another day. Let me not waste it.
And to be able to tune yourself into that is such a gift, right? I mean, because and then you feel the gift, right? But just to hear the sound of that, that water running right by your window is to sort of tap yourself into a sense of time. I mean, how long has that river been running? Hundreds of thousands of years, right? And to be that, and it's such a dynamic image. It's no wonder that we congregate and build our places of dwelling in a place like that, because to dwell is to live, but it's also to sort of think deeply and to brood deeply over something. So it's
to
really
inhabit
beautiful.
a place.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to inhabit a place. Gavin read to me, Kale, as we sat there, he read to me something that Pascal wrote in the 1600s. I don't have it in front of me now. I'll put it in my next Substack. But to sit there in deep France and talk with a learned English divine about Pascal while we drank aged Calvados, and it was in the simplest little stone hut. It was, to me, one of the richest experiences of my life. And this is what Europe can offer, but you have to be open to it.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, look, Rod, I'm glad to get back. We're gonna be a little bit more regular here. I know as both of our schedules regularize ever
It's
so
very
slightly.
important to be regular. As I get older, I'm finding that out.
Yeah, I knew it. All right. So anyway, but we'll be back, folks, and thank you, and see you next time. Cheers, guys.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.